Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man known around his office as the Toast of Spartans.
Tim Longo. That was a nice little play on words there. The Toast
Thank
of
you very
Spartans.
much. The Toast of Spartans. There are Spartans in Halo, right? That's a thing?
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And the Toast of Spartans, I'm trying to think of the Photoshop job of that, what that looks like.
Nice. Yeah, that's good.
Could go so many ways with that.
It's a mix between us in our sort of classy version done by Mark Sean, I can't remember, Mark Garcia anyway, and you as Kratos. I think
that was
a good
terrifying.
mix.
Mm-hmm.
I thought so too.
When I saw that picture on my phone, I didn't see my face in it immediately. I was like, something's weird with this, and then I zoomed in.
Well, that's because the body and the face don't match all that well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, hello, welcome back. We're of course talking. This is our third and final God of War episode, playing the original game, the 2005 game, which launched a couple of sequels and a more recent sequel. It's definitely a sequel. It's the same character, but it's also a franchise reboot since we haven't heard from it in a while. So. It's been an interesting game to go back to because it definitely feels like a game that is of not only its time, but maybe even the time before. Maybe a generation prior, with very high production values at the end of the PlayStation 2 lifecycle. But there are choices that are made that can be quite frustrating, and I know we both encountered them this time. I was streaming, and there was, after I had died for maybe the 20th time, trying to get over some spinning blades while I was tiptoeing on a board of 2 feet across. I said to my audience, "Tim is really going to hate me."
I almost quit. I definitely was like, okay, what am I going to do here if I can't get past this? Like, what are my options? Am I going to watch the rest of the game or something? Because maybe triple that. I feel like, as far as like,
oh wow,
because what happens with me? Because what happens with me with situations like this in games is I downward spiral to a point where I just get so pissed off that I just start running.
You die even faster.
Die. Now, luckily, the respawning / reloading is fast, so it wasn't too terrible. But you know what I mean? I was just like, oh yeah, this. And then I just kind of turned into this, almost just committing suicide just to do it because I'm so pissed off because I can't believe it. So yeah, so I had some downward spiral, but it's just a funny thing with those sorts of sequences. You just get that one lucky one. And you just kind of make it, and then before you know it, you're over it. So, but the topic that I think sounds like something you wanted to talk about too. But the way that I was describing my notes for this is compounding challenge, we'll call it, or compounding skill, and then kind of. Usually, I think we talk a lot about this with the Nintendo games and about Nintendo in general, their escalation of compounding challenge is quite good. They add one element to the challenge, each level or something like that. And so,
right. And they teach you how it works in kind of a simple way. And then they add a little wrinkle, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So they ease you into it. And it's the sort of quote unquote, before you know it, you've learned how to do a pretty hard thing. So they compound that challenge over time. So for this particular sequence, I wrote down everything I could think of that was introduced essentially at one time all together. Now, again, it is compounding challenge. So it's, we've balanced on beams before. Maybe I don't think we've balanced on a moving beam yet. We've never seen a blade before like that, right. Other than ones that are like in the floor or something like that. So I wrote down, so we have analog control, right? Because the balancing is analog essentially, right? And it's both balancing and moving forward on a stick. You have no camera control, So the camera is in the designer's hands. So depending on where you jump and when you jump, has an impact on your relativity of where your stick is going to move. And there's a couple moments, they did a pretty good job, but there are a couple moments in some places because I was doing some shortcuts that doesn't work well. There's timing elements because it's spinning. There's jumping input. So you have to, if you're going to jump over the blades, which I think you have to.
I believe you do, yes.
There's collision related to the jumping because the collision based on where the camera is and based on when you jump, the collision on the blades isn't completely clear all the time. There's digital failure. So you can't, unlike balancing in other places where if you fall, you can grab yourself and pull yourself up. There's not enough time to do that I've found. So you're basically digital. There's air steering, so you can mess yourself up.
To clarify on that, actually, if you fall at any point, if you are in a place where you would be hit by blades, having fallen, you now won't be able to get up. And you can't use the mechanic of falling and holding on and letting it pass over you.
No, because they will chop your hands or whatever.
Yeah, well, whatever happens there, but there's also just you can't hold on that long because he does let go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, you have to hit
there's a double whammy. Yeah, the X has to be basically immediate.
Yeah. So there's air steering, both good and bad, but you can overcorrect. There's no checkpoints along the way. It's also a maze because you're not sure which beam you're supposed to go on. So you have to do some exploration because the camera doesn't tell you. I mentioned digital failure already, no time to recover. There's audio involved. So it's best if you're listening for the blades, but sometimes you can't quite tell which blade's coming when. There's bad collision. I mentioned that. And basically my capper is that they just didn't earn this compounding challenge at this point in the game. I mean, I listed probably like 10, 15 things there. I don't know, 12 things. All are introduced together at one time for the first time here. And now statistically, if we were ever able to see the stats on this game, obviously this is a place where most people put the game down and never finished it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I was on the stream, I was actually describing. So this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what is called a wall mission or a shelf level event, which is a time where you just hit that wall and you can't climb over it, and therefore you put it back on the shelf. It is an event that rises to the level of putting the game back on the shelf. Yeah. And that's from Jamie Fristrom. At least that's where I first heard it. And this game has a couple, and one of them's later in Hades, where you actually you're so close to the end of the game and you have another shelf level event because you don't know you're close to the end of the game.
No.
And unless you were looking that sort of thing up, you wouldn't, and that would have been less the case in 2005 for players. But it is just, it's brutal. And if I were not playing it for the cast, I would have said, oh, I remember this. Yeah, I'm done. I remember how the game ends. I would not have continued at this section, and certainly not in Hades, which is just as bad. And I kept waiting there is a little place where it will save your state right at the end of the maze before you go up the ladder to the top, because I fell once there as well.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't fall there, so I think I must.
Right. I thought I didn't see the ladder immediately, and so I walked out on top of the blades because there's a thing in the distance, and I'm like, oh man, I got to go, and now I have to jump on this thing moving to get to another spot. Because I didn't see the ladder. I thought I had to go out, and as it moves, it effectively knocks you off because there's like a physics weirdness, and so it's basically impossible to do that. Even if I could have gotten out there, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But yeah, it is amazing how frustrating that section is. I was squeezing that controller so hard, and I only did it, like I said, about 20 times. There is no way I would have done it 60 times. I would have just said, oh, hey, I have something else to do. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it was definitely more than 20, maybe double. But the other thing is I get stubborn. So I'm not, not only for the cast, but I'm like, oh, you're not going to beat me, game. But that definitely doesn't always happen. If I was playing it for fun, I definitely probably would have. In fact, I think this was a wall mission for me originally, and I had to come back to it later. I don't think I finished it in a couple weeks. I think I paused. Yeah, and it's just weird too because there's so many weird pacing beats in this game that you assume they're doing for palate cleansing and variety reasons, but it's still every time they happen, they're awkward to me, because we talked about it last time, but they carry, and we've talked about, ludonarrative dissidence or what have you, but it's just like, there's just these moments where you're like, why is this character doing this right now? Based on everything else he's been doing.
Yeah. And somebody pointed out on the stream that the representation of hell, which I think is just as bad, if not worse than this section in some ways. Although there's some obnoxious stuff there, is that he pointed out that it's actually a pretty decent representation of hell in Greek myth. And in particular, it feels very Sisyphean, right? It feels like you're just doing this thing and failing and doing it and failing and again and again and again. But that is so antithetical to what this game is about.
Yeah.
Right. This game is about becoming the god of war. It's a super wish fulfillment hero fantasy thing. Yeah. And to lean into these sections where you are very disempowered and easily defeated. Right. I mean, the next thing that happens after this section is you fight that giant iron minotaur thing.
Yeah. Right.
Which is a fairly good battle, although I got a little stuck there and had to look it up. I was like, what am I missing? There's something going on here. And I hadn't found the lever I hadn't found that there was a staircase at the back of the room.
Oh, yeah. I found that when you first come in the room, I found that. And I was like,
yeah, I missed it on the way in. And so I got pushed back up to the edges. And I'm like, I've seen the whole room. What am I missing?
Yeah. Oh, so yeah. That's a good one. That's a camera. Bug.
Yeah, it's an issue because there's a little space to the left where you're ultimately going to exit here, because you'll get another face who talks to you. I forget who it is, if that's Athena.
That's where you get the souls.
Oh, right, that's Hades.
Souls of Hades, yeah.
But it looks like you can go that way, and so I was thinking, well, maybe it's that. The camera's a problem there. But anyway, I mean, you go from this sort of extremely disempowering moment to this Iron Minotaur moment, which I think is pretty, and that ends up being one of the two statues at the end of the game. It's the Iron Minotaur and it's Ares. Mm-hmm. And they both of these sections that we're talking about happen right before those big battles. So I feel like they knew what they were doing. They wanted to take you to a real low to a real high. I just don't think it works. And I feel like they could have used more Kleenex testing at this point.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. Yeah, it felt like usability and potentially the developers and the testers getting too good at the game and not really recognizing it. And it's late enough in the game where, usability may not have run into it enough, right? Because they may have had people trying to play through the whole thing, or didn't have them playing specific levels, or it's out of context, so.
Or they even just dismissed it because they tried to have people play those levels and said, well, they haven't had an opportunity to get to this point, right? And so they maybe undervalued the feedback that they got, which is not uncommon, especially for stuff that's late in the game. So, yeah, it's a misstep for sure. It's definitely misstep, pun not intended. But it definitely is those two sections feel so drastically far from the rest of the game.
So funny. The fine line to your point about sort of one of your viewers' point about the sort of the representation of Hades and the psychological sort of meta point that they could be trying to do there, especially with the Hades section, which is cool. And I wish that, and I guess the point about that I would make is that if you're trying to go for that meta concept for the player, the balance that you need to find there is more about that fine line of making them feel that way, but still not have it be punishing. It's all about balance and usability. You know what I mean? Where you're kind of right on the edge of feeling frustrated, and then you finish. It's like a good puzzle design where you're like, I'm stuck. I really don't. Oh wait, and then you get it. So you just have that moment of frustration. But when it's such an extended amount of frustration, then I think it starts to counteract their goal, if that was their goal.
I mean, it's the thing I've always said is that your variant gameplay needs to be easy. Easier. Easier. No, easier. Because there's any number of games I've played over the years. I remember there was a section in Jak and Daxter that I found really ridiculously hard. And any number of games try these things where they do something different. And I get it. You want to try something different. Another thing that came up on the stream was we get bored as developers playing the same thing constantly, and we want to try something different. And that can be motivating to these sections as well. But you need to make those sections as easy as possible so that you do get the flavor. I mean, I get it. You want some flavor and some variety.
But the palate cleansers for palate cleansing purposes, it's not to frustrate you. I mean, it's
right.
Like, let it do its job.
You eat sorbet as a palate cleanser. It's not some giant sundae, right? It's a little scoop of sorbet.
It's not a bowl of hot sauce.
It's not a bowl of hot sauce. Wow, that's an interesting analogy. Okay, so I'm trying to find some pun on sticks.
The river sticks. The river sticks of hot sauce. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was an interesting topic that we had hit offline or off air to talk about. I think the other sort of macro topic we haven't hit much is really story. Do you want to start talking about that maybe next? And or do we have a better segue?
I was going to say the segue to positive and negative feedback loops is actually probably a better mix. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that happens, and this is something I've thought about in the past, is you want to reward players who are off there trying everything and doing great and all that stuff, and doing the best things. And for example, having those 100 or more element combos and just getting that chain really high. The problem is if you leave behind the people who don't, because those are the people who are already having trouble with your game. It's not easy enough for them. They're having a real hard time succeeding, and effectively they're penalized as a result. And that is, I mean, I have counter arguments here, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Yeah, Brett and I were talking about it in pre-show, and I brought it up, and I'd forgotten Brett had written a blog post or an article about this in the past, and so we've talked about it before. But what I didn't realize, Brett mentioned last episode, what I didn't realize about the way that the red orbs work during combat is that the more combos you do, the more red orbs you get. And so it's kind of what we might call the rich get richer sort of syndrome. And so what that ends up happening is that, like Brett said, if you're really good at the game and you're good at the combos, you're going to get more of the essentially the XP, and then you can level up your stuff, which makes it easier to play the game. And if you're not good at the combos, you're getting fewer red orbs, which means you can't level up the things that will make the game give you more options on how to succeed, like having a more powerful, weapon or more powerful lightning or something. And so it's kind of the game, if it's tuned, depending on who it's tuned for, which it feels like maybe I played on easy, so I'm not sure for sure, but maybe tuned about in the middle of those two groups, but a little bit heavier on the better player, then the game's going to get, that curve is going to get harder and steeper as you go if you're kind of a casual player. And so myself, the reason I bring it up is I didn't realize that you get more red orbs from better combos because I'm not good at combos and I've never been good at combo games. And so I kind of just button mash and do, usually single digit combos most of the time.
Right.
And so I'm not getting as many red orbs. And so ultimately on easy, I don't think it really mattered for me. And so maybe that's the solution that somebody would say is, I'll just drop it down to easy. But I don't think that's completely fair.
It's not. I mean, I feel like there are potential strategies for getting around the issue of, as a player, if you're not getting as many orbs, then you just need to double down on the 2 or 3 skills you're going to pour it into and not put it into anything else. So you're only going to power up one main weapon, either the blades or the Artemis sword or whatever.
Yeah, but then you can't explore the game as much, and you feel
right. Yeah, no, I think you'd probably have to restart to actually think to do this strategy, to be honest. I mean, I don't think it's a good solution. But I do think it's the sort of thing you get to the end of a game's development and maybe you know about these issues and you say, well, here's what those players do, right? And you make an argument as a developer to QA, and we've done this ourselves. We've made arguments to QA. Well, the player's gonna have to do this. There's a possible way through, right? And
you find a justification.
You're right. You rationalize the poor choices that have led you to this point, and the fact that you're about to ship, and you just say, well, is it really as bad if they have a way they could do it, right? I mean, that's the conversation you have. We've had this conversation with QA, and usually QA backs down on that, and maybe they shouldn't. But it's pretty hard getting to the end of the game when there's and it's crashing. We should fix the crashing and not worry so much about this problem, right? So I think it's a natural consequence of just when you tend to discover issues like these is, oh, here we are at the end of the game and people are not getting as many orbs as we thought. And because even as the playing on medium, I didn't get enough orbs to power everything all the way.
Yeah, I mean, what I ended up doing,
I didn't miss many. So
yeah, I mean, what I ended up doing is focusing on just two things, to your point. That's all I could do. And I guess I didn't realize I was doing it, but can you essentially drain something you've put points, you basically respec? Because when I had fully leveled up my Artemis sword, I noticed that the Blades of Chaos were back at level 1, and I don't know how that happened because I did have them leveled up at one point. So I was able to get them. Yeah.
I didn't think that was possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't investigate it, but it felt like I drained it from one thing and put it into another, but I didn't test that theory out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I went back to a save or something. But long story short, I only got my sword up fully, and then I did the leftover I had. I powered up my my Hades souls because I hadn't fooled around with that in my first playthrough, and those are kind of cool because they're just automatic. You don't have to do anything. Right.
Yeah, you just hit the button. Yeah,
and they go do it for you. So that was kind of fun. I even used that in the Ares battle. That was useful there too. But anyway, yeah, that's it's a tricky one because it's a kind of it's the other tension I feel like with this topic is that one of the advantages of this game is there was a bit of a quote unquote kind of messaging narrative around the game that it was because of the presentation being over the top and it's just this great power fantasy. It was sort of that Devil May Cry or combo based combat game for the masses.
Yeah,
because you didn't have to worry about camera and you could just mash the buttons, and it was just like dumb fun. It was just like, you're just going to be in the God of War. It's just great. Just watch this spectacle. But then this kind of thing, this topic we're talking about kind of counteracts that a little bit. Unless you just play on easy, which I still think is a bit of a cop out because you want that, and as I think we've talked about before, Nintendo doesn't even have difficulty levels.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, it's just a kind of a Band-Aid. A Band-Aid. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, interesting one that I didn't anticipate because I didn't really know how the orbs work. To be honest, I didn't know because I've never been good at the combos.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I don't feel like it's a huge difference, but it might be hundreds of orbs by the end. Another thing I did is that I didn't spend them. I just kept them and they built up and built up and built up. And then I'd get to a point where I stuck and then I'd spend them.
Yeah.
So I had a kind of weird approach that I was doing anyway, because I was doing fine without it. So I just kept going. But it's tricky. I wonder if you get more, because I definitely leveled things all the way to the max more than you did. I feel like I had 3 and maybe 4 abilities that were maxed out.
Oh, geez. Wow. And I
definitely had 3. I can't remember if I had a 4th, but I maxed out. I did a lot of stuff. I had a lot of upgrades. Again, that might be a difficulty thing where it's like you get more red orbs on the higher difficulty levels.
Yeah,
too,
that's true. Maybe,
which I can believe.
If they're doing some dynamic difficulty with that, or difficulty level,
just difficulty adjustment,
that would be good. I would give them kudos for that, because it's a good system. But I guess, unless you play both levels, you wouldn't know that you're getting more. So maybe it's hidden from the casual player. And I actually did a fair amount of exploring, such as it is, though I hate exploring in this game, to be honest. So I feel like I did find quite a few of the chests that had red orbs in it, so I don't think that was my problem. But yeah, if you had that much more, then that was quite a bit, because it's hard to max a level of something. I will say the Artemis sword, once I did have it max level, very effective at killing things. I mean, it's just slicing. The only problem with it doesn't have range, and that didn't help me at the end when range was beneficial in the last 2 kind of big fights. But it really was slicing people in not very many hits, because I think it was so powered up. But
yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's touch on the puzzles, and then we'll do the story thing, I think, because
that's good order.
Yeah. I mean, I did actually talk about this a little bit last time about how the scale really works, but I think that the scale also works for puzzles. I've commented a number of times on my stream that I really love games in which there's this enormous scale, and you're doing some crazy thing that it's absolutely completely unrealistic, the stuff that you see in Tomb Raider or Uncharted. There were not civilizations that made these enormous things that turned out just to open some lock, basically, right, to let you to some other level of their pyramid. I mean, King Tut didn't even have a secret room in his pyramid, we learned this week. I guess you didn't. You haven't read the King Tut headlines.
No, I missed that this morning.
In any case, so there are a lot of puzzles here I really quite like, and I like geometric puzzles in particular, and there's a number of those. But what did you think of the puzzles? What stood out to you that you liked or disliked, for that matter?
Well, I mean, the thing for me is that it's similar to our topic on the balance beam, the balance beam sections that we're talking about with the blades and such, in that I guess for me, and I definitely overthink this as a player, because I like to have a balance and a cohesion to the fantasy fulfillment that I'm being kind of quote unquote sold. And so you start this game out, and with the exception of maybe getting a key, and there's a couple balancing beam sections in the boat area, you're sold this power fantasy like we talked about. And then when I get to these sections, like the Tetris block section, and there's a couple others that they're not coming to me, but they're definitely downbeats, and they're good from a pacing perspective. But I guess for me, it just is out of place enough to where it just still feels weird, that I'm doing
just because of what the character does otherwise.
Yeah, I'm pushing these blocks around, and the one that I did like but was over designed was remember the architect's tomb, where you're trying to get into the tomb and you have to
lower the block.
And you use the block and the crane twice, which I thought was clever.
And you have to use the statue twice. Oh, actually, I guess you don't have to use the statue twice.
No, you just have to.
Right, but I think it's natural for a player to go to the statue and pull it out and put it down in there and go, which is what I did. I guess it's not essential.
So that one was kind of neat, because it felt like it was using things in the environment, and I guess the architect might have had a crane over his,
right.
You know what I mean? So because he was making stuff, but that one was close enough. But a lot of the other ones,
how long have those ropes been there? Yeah, exposed to the elements.
That's a good point. Well, you're on Kronos' back, so maybe it's maybe. Anyway, and
Magic
so
ropes.
I guess for me, it kind of comes down to a little bit of the willing suspension of disbelief or something, where I'm just like, I don't know. Like this pretty contrived puzzles. And it just felt like a kind of a leftover vestigial thing coming from a Tomb Raider or from these games that were third person combination of genres kind of merged together that was happening around this time, right, where genres were being merged together. And I think Tomb Raider is a good example of that because there was quote unquote combat, puzzle solving, and navigation in three-dimensional space. And so we talked about this with Soul Reaver as well, kind of some of that stuff. And I just think it just didn't fit as well for me. And every time I hit one, it just kind of felt like it broke me out of the experience. But you said you like some of them. So I mean, what were some of?
I do. I mean, I'd like the puzzle where you had to figure out how to line up the rings of the circular maze so that the beam
the rings of Pandora. Yeah, that was a cool macro puzzle. I agree with you there. That was neat. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're doing successive challenges, and basically your reward is to solve this problem, to open, I guess, to an elevator, I guess was at that point. But I like that a lot, and there's such a variety, and it's sort of a multiple level type thing. There are no levels, but it feels similar to something that in another game might happen across multiple levels, where I went and solved this part, and then I solved this part, and I solved this part, and those felt like three distinct things, and then they all tied together into a bigger thing. So I think that you're right there. That's sort of a interesting macro. I didn't mind the Tetris puzzle. I solved it basically in one go, so it wasn't particularly hard for me. But I like geometry. I mean, it was telling people, oh, I like this sort of thing. And I just sort of looked at it and just figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, I solved it quickly, but it wasn't really about its difficulty. It was just more about its weirdness, and yeah, anyway.
You got to put all that weight, man, on top of that thing to make it go down.
Okay, I guess so. Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. I'm trying here, Tim.
Well, so, I mean, not to bring in my Tomb Raider experience, but one of the interesting questions that we talked about early in development when we were talking about how puzzles were going to try to evolve. And this was really Noah Hughes, who is a big proponent of this, who's still at Crystal working on the Tomb Raider games. I mean, it's something that they carried over from Tomb Raider Legend a little bit, but I think they really hit out of the park with the reboot, was essentially dynamic-based puzzles or physics-based puzzles or real-world rule-based puzzles. And so things like weight and mass and momentum, kinetic energy, potential energy, buoyancy. Like the first cave puzzle in the reboot that we worked on had buoyancy and like levers and weight distribution and things that if you thought about how the real world worked, you could get through it, versus kind of the confounding mysterious puzzle part of it. And right. So those and that's why I think I like that architect one more, because there was sort of I could piece it together in my head a little bit versus it being kind of this gamey thing. So anyway, yeah, it's a taste thing too. Like, that was just me. I just like it when things are kind of cohesive a little bit more when it comes to a fictional perspective. But
yeah, no, I can certainly see that. And the architect puzzle does make not a ton of sense to me talking about it. I mean, it's somewhat motivated, but not well motivated.
Well, yeah. Why are there pressure plates there?
Right. I mean, but you can sort of imagine, oh, well, actually, there were two statues originally or something, and, who knows? But, right, because you even have to break through a hole in the ground. That doesn't make a lot
one of the
sense.
pressure plates is underground. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the third one is across the
right. So you have to go back. Oh God. Yeah, I died a number of times there as well.
I guess the only thing they have going for them is there is this kind of concept of, ancient challenges that the gods are putting people through. The tests of the gods, which is a bit of a Greek myth kind of thing. So, maybe they have a bit of a get it a jail free card there.
The maze of the Minotaur, and in fact, I think that's the second one, and things like that. And I love that stuff, right? And I talked about sort of my enjoyment of Harryhausen films and things like that. So all that stuff really appeals to me. It just, if you stop to think about these in a lot of cases, I mean, that's why I like the Pandora one, because it actually feels like, you know what, that one holds up. That one doesn't feel like you're turning giant gears basically, and you can. In fact, there's places where you can actually see the gears move to move things, such as that crane. And I always like those little touches of like, oh, this is actually motivated. There's actually a physical mechanism here that makes some kind of sense. Same thing with like turning around the big. What are they called? The big crossbows. There's a word for that. Ballustra? Some ballustra.
Yeah. I think it starts with a B, and I'm forgetting it too. But Bastilla? No.
Ballista.
Shit.
Ballista. Yeah, that's it.
Clean cast. Sorry.
Yeah, we're doing so well.
Just cussed.
Yeah. Anyway, let's turn from that to the story. Why don't you take the story stuff?
Well, I mean, Brett made a point. I don't remember if it was pre-show or not about sort of the Greek tragedy nature of the sort of aesthetic of the story that they were going for, and kind of how those Greek tragedies are so over the top in their thematic material and their presentation and the melodrama, and being somebody who studied theater and has a theater education, I definitely am intimately aware of Greek tragedies, especially the theatrical pieces and stuff. And so
intimately aware. You must have done the Bacchae.
I did.
Wow.
Well, Jen did, I think, but I didn't.
That was just a little Greek tragedy humor for you.
Very good. Yeah, so you convinced me some on that, because I definitely, once you mentioned that, I looked at it from then on through a different lens that I hadn't before. I think before I was just taking it as a, good or bad video game story, and because so many games still today, and definitely of this era, were very melodramatic. And then we were talking about in the first episode about this coming out the same year as Shadow of the Colossus, which had a very economical and elegant story, I thought, right? Very minimalistic, but
very minimal and open to a lot of interpretation.
Yeah.
Or actually, I mean, there may not be a lot of different ways you can interpret it, but more that you have to do the work to piece some things together. Like, this character riding across the bridge with all his army, must be the father or the lord or the whatever, of this young woman who's dead, and things like that, right? You have this sort of, you stitch together a story pretty. There's probably not a lot of different ways that plays out, but you have to do some work. There's not a lot of that here.
letting the player fill in the gaps, of what's there, but pretty easily coming to conclusions, on the same conclusions. And here it's obviously just they dole it out over time, and they start in a cool way, like we talked about with the suicide, and so you kind of get to unravel why he had gotten to that point. And so, but I think ultimately it falls flat for me, because I think, I guess going through it again, there's the note I wrote down is that I felt like it ultimately was kind of thin. And the motivations ended up being so base and overly simple, because in the Greek tragedy way, though those themes were simple, I guess, and sort of universal, there generally was still some pretty good heft to people's motivations and some real deep psychology going on. But here, essentially,
here it's basically, I want to win.
Yeah, I want to win, and I was about
to player expectation.
Yeah, and I was about to lose by getting killed by the barbarians, and then he calls, basically it's the the Faustus, story of like selling your soul to the devil, but in this case it's Ares, the god of war, and so Ares, saves him, but requires him to be his servant for the end of time, and thus creating sort of the perfect warrior under Ares's name, and so, but little does he know that Ares has plans for him, and then it kind of takes advantage of him over time, and then he just becomes bloodthirsty, ultimately sacking, I guess, a town that he used to live in. I don't know why his family was there, and then
that is just left unexplained. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so Kratos ends up accidentally kind of killing his own wife and daughter, and then you find out Ares kind of planned for that because he wants to take obstacles away from Kratos becoming the perfect warrior. And of course, that becomes a revenge story at that point against Ares. And so that's ultimately what you're going after. And so, yeah, it sucks that you killed your own family, but you sold your soul to the devil. And it's just hard to kind of care about him and his decisions. And,
yeah, no, I agree. It doesn't feel like Oedipus, where
exactly.
He just kind of fell into this ugly situation. It doesn't really feel it doesn't feel like there was a thing that he desperately wanted. He defended his own life against some guy who turned out to be his dad, and oh well, it's a shame that it turned out that way, right? And there's definitely here. I mean, I will say I do like the structure where you're kind of learning in parallel how he became this character.
That's fair.
Even if he's not sympathetic, fundamentally, and because of where he ends up, I think I would argue he's not meant to be sympathetic, right? He ends up being the god of war, and that is not necessarily somebody you're supposed to like. So I think the parallel's okay, but I agree with you. There's not a lot of depth to that character, and it does play, I think, a little bit on the sort of 300 fantasy of just these were the baddest, the toughest, or what have you.
300 came out before this, right? I assume it must have had an
no, it was a little bit after this. I think the next year. I think it was 2006. The movie? But there was a 300, the book on the
Frank Miller,
comic book with Frank Miller. Must have been before that. That's such a clear adaptation. Yeah, that goes back to the 90s. So I mean, I think that it probably draws on that and all of that. But yeah, it's a simplistic character, and I think that that's where actually fundamentally the sort of ties to Greek tragedy fall down a little bit. Is that Greek tragedy is fundamentally a character issue. And here the character is pretty blank, and that's a video game problem.
This is more plot than character. Yeah,
exactly. And basically he becomes a character after all these things have happened, because now he's got a thing that he actually wants. That's not, I just don't want to die. It's, I want revenge for this thing that was done to me, which is a deeper character than I don't want to die. So anyway, I mean, I think it's interesting. I like how it's told. I love the circularity of the suicide, which of course is a thing I always like in a video game, is where you end up where you began. And I think that's all kind of really lovely. But yeah, I mean, I would agree that there's directions that could have gone that would have been a little more interesting, but I think that's hard to do in this format.
Well, and it sounds like that they, over time, because I don't think I played 2 or 3, to be honest. I feel like maybe I played some of 2 at some point, but it seems like they recognize that this character does have places to go with a new one. I haven't started it yet, but so it's good to hear that they identify that, and found ways to, some of the same people that worked on these found ways to evolve, especially for, obviously the landscape is much different too. So maybe now is a good time for that. And I do think that there's sort of almost Conan-esque ending on the throne and becoming the god of war himself. And then I totally forgot about that great little series of vignettes showing war across history.
Right.
Once he sits on the throne, that was a great touch too, where you just kind of get the sense of the gravity of what, yes, he got his revenge, but his reward was,
more of it.
was more of it and for eternity, so it really, I don't remember, but I feel like 2 and or 3 is kind of about going after the rest of the gods.
Yeah, I think 2 he goes after Zeus, and 3 maybe the rest of the Titans. I think the Titans start coming after Olympus, and I think he goes after the Titans. I know it begins with him taking out Gaia.
Gaia. So they find places to go, but it was just to your point about sort of the circularity of it. Him ending up on the throne, I thought was cool too. And there's that. It always elicits Conan to me for sitting on the throne at the end. So they're definitely, and the thing that I really can't, you can't deny is the presentation of a lot of this stuff. I mean, we can't, when it comes to story, combining story moments with gameplay moments, the fighting yourself, many versions of yourself while hugging your family to give them your health, that's pretty memorable sequence. For that little boss battle section there after Ares. And so they definitely found interesting, gimmicks, I guess, sort of, ways to present that stuff. But just the presentation of the game and those story moments, the craftsmanship is just so amazing that to some degree, that's the spectacle of it. I forget about some of that stuff. I don't think I really thought that much about the story side of things when I first played it, because I was just kind of so drawn into that. And so it's only because of the podcast that I forced myself to think about it more. And there's
I also like the real lovely circularity where he's met Hades, and who was digging that grave down into the underworld. And then,
was that Hades? I wasn't sure which.
I'm pretty sure that's meant to be Hades. He doesn't say. But he kind of gives a wink. So I've got to figure, because he basically says, well, there's other gods who are trying to support you, right? So I feel like that's meant to be Hades. And weren't they the 3 brothers, Hades and Ares and Zeus?
Poseidon?
Ooh, Poseidon, yeah, you're right.
Well, I think
Ares is a child of Zeus. You're right. No, it's Poseidon. It's Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus.
Because that's the 3.
Sorry, I misspoke.
Those are the 3 challenges in Pandora's rings: is Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. I think.
Yep, you're right. Yep. That makes sense. But
that was when you climb up that rope. And I forgot actually about that guy, and forgot from the first playthrough and from this playthrough, because it was, I guess, long enough ago. I was like, where the heck is this rope coming from? When you're crawling out of Hades, and then you come up and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's that dude from Athens. But I didn't put 2 and 2 together as Hades. You're probably right on that. So there's a lot of nice touches like that really make it memorable, so anyway, we definitely are good at picking things apart, even if they don't always fully deserve it.
Yep, that's for sure. That's us.
Yep.
In terms of other stuff, I think the only other thing I want to make sure we talk about is how good the music is.
Yeah.
And I think that this has one of those. Yeah, this soundtrack is really wonderful. It's really rich and lush, and is. I wouldn't say it's a foreshadowing of what's to come, because we already had some very good soundtracks before that. But it definitely. I think it reflects a change over the generation that it caps, to using a lot more of orchestration. And large orchestras and big sounds. I think that sort of stuff sort of started with things like Medal of Honor, if I'm not crazy about that. I think Michael Giacchino even wrote maybe the first Medal of Honor games soundtrack.
Possibly, yeah. He came from games, and now he
I know he did
everything. Yeah,
TV. Yep. No, he wrote for Lost, and he's done tons of stuff. Tons of movies too. but not to pick on him in particular. I'm actually going to look up the composers because I want to mention them because I do think it is good.
It didn't dawn on me until this moment, but and I had this was unintentional, but it's very reminiscent of Conan, the Conan score. There's a lot of choral work and a lot of big melodramatic sweeping pieces that really fit well. And now that I think about it, I wonder how much influence Conan had on a lot of the tone of things.
I'm sure it did, right?
I only bring it up
because Conan the Barbarian. I'm
talking about the original. Yeah, because for whatever reason that was a big movie for me as a child. A lot of memories for it. So it's really ingrained in my head. So, but there's a lot more similarities than I had thought about until just now. So, but the soundtrack especially.
One person that I wanted to point out was Clint Bajakian was a music supervisor.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Good
yeah.
for him. So he's ex LucasArts for those who don't know. And he was there when we were there. So, I'm sure you know Clint. I know Clint. But he was probably freelance at this point. So he was probably doing that via, because once he left Lucas, he became freelance. I think he's been ever since, but yeah, he's good.
Yeah. We're talking about terrific. Yeah.
He did Outlaws, I believe, right?
Yeah, he definitely did Outlaws. And man, I love Outlaws. I love the music in Outlaws. It's one of my absolute favorites. So there's quite a number of names who are credited. Gerard Marino, Michael Reagan, Ron Fish, Winifred Phillips, Winnie Waldron, Chris Velasco, Marcelo de Francisci. It's hard to find who those look like. Well, they're not alphabetical, so I don't know how the names are. I don't know how that is spread around and how the credit goes. But there's some fantastic music work, orchestration work here that is just really kind of a peak, I think, in this era, which was not uncommon coming at the end of the platform's life as it did. But it's just great work, and I feel like you hear some Lawrence of Arabia in some ways. There's a lot of sort of, especially in the desert sort of sections and things like that. And you're leading up to it. I feel like there's some influences there, but it has that epic feel. Just wonderful, and also exotic. It has the da 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 da. Sort of. It's not straightforward, just a brass fanfare. It's a little more seductive than that, I guess is the word I would use, which is something I associate with, I guess broadly speaking, Mediterranean area music. It doesn't sound like later Western European music. It sounds like a regional music in a way, just orchestrated in a really big way. So, I think it's fantastic. And it's something that a few people brought up on the stream, and I made a note of it because I didn't want to forget. Maybe an MVP for the game for me. It's also interesting, when they don't use music, and there was only one time that I noticed, and that's when you're pushing Pandora's box out of that room that you get it into, and you start pushing it out, and it's silent. There's no music at all, and that I don't remember any other time when there was no music. And it's a good time to not have it, because that's when he gets sent down into Hades as well. So, just an interesting soundtrack all around from a lot of perspectives. And but yeah. Anyway, what do you say we take a quick break, a brick quake, and come back and then talk a couple of takeaways and get to our one bit of feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. As we like to do when we finish a series, we want to at least touch on some takeaways, sort of the highlights, occasionally the lowlights that we want to discuss about games that we've discussed, the sort of things that we'd like to take forward in our own game development practice or think that might be interesting to other game developers or aspiring game developers. Sir, what's your first takeaway?
My first one, I would say, the thing I think about first whenever I think about this game is the camera and the full commitment that we talked about probably in the first episode of a fully controlled, scripted, and designed.
It was only last week, but that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember. We probably talk about it a little bit every episode, but yeah, just the full commitment to the use of camera in this. It was. Though, it's easy to say that for a third-person game, they're probably not the first ones, but I feel like the use and the cinematography of the camera for, especially in this era, was pretty unmatched. And like I said, I think when we talked about it in previous episodes, it ended up becoming a hot topic for game developers because they were so kind of bold with that, right? Because the concept of taking control away from the player for camera was not as popular as probably it should be. And so this was a bit of a fork in the road, I think, for people to say, well, hey, if you're going to make this kind of game, it is okay to do that. And for the most part, though I wasn't happy consistently, I think the percentage of time that they did a good job with it was pretty admirable. So that commitment to full camera, full camera scripting was my first one.
Yeah, no, I do. I agree. It's admirable. I think you're right about the way that it's pretty consistent throughout. I'd also add that they give you a lot of interesting things to look at, and in their environments. Their environments have a lot of interesting detail. I guess that'd make it a good segue to one of my takeaways, which is this is really at the end of a PS2 life cycle. This really shows everything that the PS2 can do. It took us however many years to get there, 7 years to get there, but this really is a pinnacle, technically speaking, of what the platform can do. You're pushing as much geometry as you possibly can, use a ton of animation, which is something we've talked a little bit about. And it also streams all this data constantly from disk. And even though you can tell where the areas are, where they're basically, here's a little zigzag hallway where we're going to load the next area, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's more or less, there's a couple times where it says loading, where individual individual disk drives may not be able to keep up. But fundamentally, they are loading an awful lot of texture, an awful lot of geometry, and rendering it all and having this complicated moveset on top of it for Kratos. I think it all works really, really well. And I do think it is of a handful of games that I would point people at for what the platform could do. Technically, it's really up there on my list. The other one I think I would put up there, and it's actually kind of a counter lesson in a way, because it doesn't manage to maintain its frame rate, is Shadow of the Colossus, which could not, which was writing checks the hardware couldn't cash. It's gorgeous. I wouldn't change a thing about it. That's not the comment I'm trying to make, but I am saying they actually made all the choices that they should make here to get the absolute most that they could out of it. And I would say they made trade-offs that, if that's your goal, they made the right trade-offs to do it. So that is one thing I really appreciated about it. We often don't know until we're at the end of a platform cycle what the hardware is fully capable of. And I do remember, as a technical person, looking at this game and going, wow, I've done a couple of games on this platform, and wow, they really got a lot out of it. So that's the thing for me.
Those two go hand in hand too. You couldn't have done that without the camera decision.
Yep, absolutely. They'd have to know exactly where they're gonna put the camera, so they don't have to draw all the stuff that the player would normally be able to spin the camera around and see. They can put a lot more detail in the environments because they know you're not going to be able to see beyond your peripheral vision, right? Essentially. And in a game that is a little more close to the character, you would typically allow the player to rotate that camera so they can see the threats, and that's just not the case here. Yeah. Fantastic. It all really plays hand in hand to achieve that.
Yep.
And your second?
So my second is a bit of a general one, but we talked a lot about it, of course, is just the spectacle of the game, which goes with Brett's sort of what they got out of the platform, but just the sense of awe that they inspire in the way that they put some of these sequences together. And the example that I always think about and was reminded by finishing the game was just the enormous sword that you run across sort of early third of the game or quarter of the game, kind of toward the end of Athens, I think. I think that's
right
Athena,
before you go
right?
to the
It's
desert.
Athena's sword, and so she's kind of sending you on this mission in general because it's her brother. Ares is her brother, I think.
Right. And it's her city she's trying to protect.
Yeah, exactly. And he's jealous of her and blah, blah, blah. So you're running across her sword. And then when you grow to the size of a god yourself to fight him, you literally have to take that sword that you ran across and use it, and sort of those. And they're just countless ones, like Kronos, the whole thing with Kronos and the sort of presentation of his scale and size, and just the sense that you're playing multiple levels on his back, and just amazing spectacle. And again, not only for the platform, but just in general for going over the top with that stuff. There's just, it's, sometimes you just want that kind of popcorn spectacle in your game or your film, and they just kind of just went to the hilt with it. No pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's a good pun. I hope it was intended. Actually,
no, I wish it were, but it wasn't.
I mean, to call out a game that I feel really takes a lot from this is Darksiders. Well, both of them, which have sort of the big scale of these things with some of the fights, but also have that same sense of bombast, as it were. Just, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and we're gonna tackle the big myth here. So the spectacle is both at the story level and in some of the graphical choices. Yeah, for me, and it's something we didn't talk a ton about because Tim's not as big a fan of this sort of thing as I am, but I really love the combat in this game. I do like combo games. I'm getting old enough that they're getting a little bit difficult for me, but I do feel myself slipping into the flow with this game at times when I can see the tells on the screen. And as I mentioned, I was streaming and there's a little audio delay when I do that, so I can't always hear them. But often I can see what's coming and I can dodge at the right time, and I can keep that flow going and get that over 100 chain combo and just feel like just amazing how that pays off. And that's not something I can remember feeling in a lot of other games, because a lot of other combo games for me were just a little bit too difficult, a little bit too far. Ninja Gaiden is the classic example for me. I haven't played Devil May Cry, though. I recently picked up some trilogy remaster yada 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 thing, so someday I'm going to check it out, because I know that one's supposed to have pretty great sort of feel as well in the combat.
Bayonetta as well is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I've played Bayonetta, but I also found that one too difficult. And I think that here there's the sort of relentless focus on the attack, and the defense is more a tenth of the time or a quarter of the time maybe. And so you can actually get better at the button mashing kind of part of it, and then because you're mostly successful at that, it feels like eventually you start to, because that's very comfortable and you're just banging the buttons pretty well and you get the rhythm of the attacks, that eventually you have the little windows where you recognize the attacks that they're going to do. The minotaurs who shove the axe at your face or swing the big hammer or what have you. And you have that moment of just, oh, I see that coming, and you can back away from it real quickly. And when that works well, and when you're just stringing that all together, it's pretty great. And I feel like if I kept playing it, I'd just get better at it. And there's obviously an upper limit to what I can probably achieve as far as that goes, but it felt pretty awesome. And I forgive it a lot for that as well. So anyway, that's one of those things. If I ever make another action game, this is one of the games I would look at for the combat.
Yeah, it's a bit more of a every person kind of combat system. I'll give you that versus some of those others you mentioned. Definitely a bit more accessible, and I mean, I have fun. I have enough fun with it, even as a button masher. But I do, and I want to get better at it. I think it's something that, like, even though I know I'm not good at combo games, I always try.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I think it could have done a little better is to tutorialize what would be more effective against different enemies. So there are different attacks that you can use on different enemies that actually work pretty well. But you sort of have to experiment constantly to find that. So that can be a little bit tricky. But if you're doing that, even just as a side effect of button mashing, that can be really kind of cool and useful. So I enjoy the combat system a lot, and I do enjoy that it's open to button mashing and is also a thing that you can actually get really, really good at. Whereas I felt like, you mentioned Bayonetta, I felt like Bayonetta was a game that I had a real, real hard time with because I couldn't just mash my way through. Especially in the boss battles, it was very necessary to know, I need to dodge in these particular ways, which was not a thing I felt I'd been rewarded for. So,
yeah. Well, Platinum, that's kind of
that's their thing. I know. One of these days, I'm going to go back to the Metroid Other M and just turn off all the voice lines and just play the game, and ignore what they did to Samus.
Well, that might have been. Was that Team Ninja? That might have not been Platinum.
Oh, you're right. That was Team Ninja. I'm sorry. I take that back.
I couldn't remember, but I
take that back. Platinum. No, you're right. It's totally Team Ninja. That's totally Team Ninja.
However, though, if you ever want to play a Platinum game that I didn't mind and felt like I did okay at, you could, of course, play Metal Gear Rising. So
I have that.
Just saying.
Yep. Once I'm done with Metal Gear Solid 4,
epic, boss battles and crazy scale. And of course you're Raiden, so
yeah,
what can go wrong?
The best Metal Gear Solid hero.
Okay, well, no, that's not what I said.
Don't send your hate mail to me. I'm just messing around. Jesus. All right. Anyway, so we're not going to talk about this time what we're going to do next time. Because we're figuring that out, and we're hoping to have some bonus stuff for this series. We're trying to see how that all shakes out. So in the meantime, just keep an eye on the Twitter. We probably won't. We're hoping we won't start another game for a week or two at least. So I think at least a week for sure, and then we'll see about 2 or even 3 weeks if we can nail down some interviews we're reaching out on. In the meantime, we've got a little bit of feedback. We've got an email sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. I also want to throw in there that you can send us podcast reviews through Apple Podcasts. And we'd love to have those. And also it helps us reach new listeners. You, sir, and I definitely gave this one to you, and you'll see why.
Yeah, I read ahead.
You have our email this week. Yeah, it has a question in it, and then it has a lot of fun for Tim at the end.
Okay, this is not nice. All right, Mikel Lodal, I guess maybe I feel like he's written in before.
He has written in before. He is a senior lecturer and director of Institute.
That's right,
at the Institute for Danish Game Development.
Yeah, he's a badass, basically. So good for him. Okay, here we go. That's son of a. All right. Hey, Brett and Tim. Those are still your real names, right? I'm really enjoying your God of War podcast and was completely blown away by the Mark Crow interview. My setting for listening to it was getting up and having breakfast in an Italian hotel from the late 70s. That's awesome. I got up at a much too early hour, so walking around that environment drained of people who all rose at a much later, much more sensible hour, and hearing about Sierra moving into new empty offices was a very potent combination. Mark's experiences reminded me of the journals of Jordan. It's Mechner, right? Is that right? Or is it
Mechner, I think.
Is it Mechner? Okay, I was never sure.
That's what I've always said. So
okay, Jordan Mechner from back when he made Karateka and Prince of Persia in the 80s. If you haven't read them, I thoroughly recommend them. A very interesting look into someone making it up as they go along, as well as how to try to stay motivated when there's not an industry process that continually convinces you that your work makes sense.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I've actually read those journals, and they are really fun.
That sounds cool. I think
they're neat. They're really just taking his journals from the period, and I mean, like his journals that he wrote at home in the morning, and some of it's just figuring out how to make the games he's making. Really interesting stuff.
That's cool. Yeah, that's very similar to Mark's.
We don't have enough of that, so that's cool.
Yeah, no, none of us. I have no journals. Not that
I still have my Republic Commando notebook.
Really?
Yeah, and I have my either Starfighter or Jedi Starfighter notebook. I can't remember which, but I'll have to go find it.
I burn all those things.
As if you write. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, there were no journals. Anyway, he literally says, anyway, you're not getting through an email from me without a question, so here goes. I recently started a project trying to chart out a design methodology for making empowering games. That is, games where the player can feel empowered all the way through playing them. This entails giving a lot of customization options, making problems solvable in more than two different ways, channeling destructive emotions healthily into constructive pursuits, and so on. Ooh, I like the sound of this. Basically giving space to be assertive of yourself without slipping into domination of the game world. A pretty good contrasting example could be how exploration is handled in Mass Effect Andromeda. Go to a planet, kill some people, plant a flag, and everything. The game exists in different creatures and objects all over the universe, exploring the connections between life, with Mass Effect Andromeda being about domination and everything, the game being about expressing yourself through choosing what to exist as. Presenting this idea at the recent Quo Vadis conference in Berlin, the audience had some great questions, including what makes the difference between a power fantasy and an empowering game. This made me think of God of War and the brutality of Kratos' interactions with the world, but also of the thoughts on wish fulfillment you've featured in the podcast. Granted that the category of empowering games is something I made up, I'd love to hear if you have any immediate thoughts on making distinctions between assertion through domination and assertion through self-expression in game design. Finally, what you think about that one, audience? And Brett, his last paragraph here. Finally, I can't end this email without writing a sentence specifically for Tim. : Profound and profuse apologies for my extravagant loquaciousness, which audaciously presupposes that eloquence is necessarily, ontologically, and exclusively a function of multisyllabic morphological gymnastics. Sorry.
Not bad.
I could mess something up there, but
you messed up loquaciousness, but that's fine.
Okay, all right. No, thank you for correcting me, and thank you, Mikkel. As you say, Venlig Hilsen, or kind regards from Mikkel Lodahl, who is in fact a senior lecturer and director of Institute of Danish Game Development. Yeah, you're something, sir. Thank you. Brett, when he saw this come in, he was probably just
my eyes just popped right open. I said, "Oh, this is so good."
I do want to say to the audience, though, do not make this a trend. I will decline, but I'll give you this one, Mikkel.
I'm gonna say though, this, as Brett here, the singer from last time, go ahead, hit me with your best shot, as it were. Oh, no. I'm willing to sing any review that comes in the form of a song if I can recognize it. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if you do that, I'll read big words, some more big words. But yeah, reading a review to hit me with your best shot would be great to hear.
Yep. All right. Anyway, in terms of empowering games, I mean, I think of games where you create stuff as being sort of fundamentally empowering. So I kind of reach for Minecraft. Maybe not in survival mode, which is definitely involves some. I mean, there is a possibility for domination there. The alternative is defense. You just build a house that's well enough fortified that you don't have to worry about the night creatures. But I think in general, the sort of, if you ignore that stuff and go into sort of more creative mode, you can totally just channel all your energy into building beautiful or ugly or whatever things. And I love that. I don't think that's exactly what he's getting at, but it is the first thing that I thought of.
I know. I agree with you. I think it is what he's talking about. I mean, personally, I love this topic. I love that he is doing this. I hope he publishes something about it someday. I think it's really an interesting distinction between the two concepts that I hadn't thought about before, but will likely steal from him in my day-to-day life now. No, I'm kidding. I'll give him credit. But just we talk so much in this industry about power fantasy and about what it means to be a powerful player. Of course, I work on Halo, so it's like Master Chief is sort of the consummate example of that. And so it's a common topic, but it is completely different from empowering the player. I think it's a really good distinction. And the example that I think the creation is a good one. The other example that I often come to kind of for myself as a player, because I enjoy when this happens, is when you discover a moment and when you're playing a game where you feel clever. And that can be in every game genre, I think, has some element of that. We talk a lot about it in the adventure games we've played when you figure that puzzle out. But in highly dynamic games that are highly emergent as well, when you think of an interesting way to put two and two together to solve a problem. And I'm still kind of pretty deep into Breath of the Wild right now. And that game is just built on empowerment. You're not the most powerful character in the world, so to speak, but you can do so much with all of your tools. You feel so empowered because you can be clever about how to use and combine all the different elements and all the different damage types and enemy types and things. So, being clever, I think, is empowering as well. And I think games that give players the ability to be clever and not limit them and not make them play a specific way, which is kind of completely counter to God of War, where you have to play in a specific way other than maybe the combat mechanics, I think is empowering. So anyway, that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I'm thinking back to a conversation I had, I guess it's 10 years ago now, with a producer on Fallout 3, who asked me what I really appreciated about the game. And I said, I love the times when I can take something out of the environment and turn it to my advantage. And there's a number of different parts to this. And it also makes me think in that regard of the original XCOM, which we played a few games back. But when the AI behaves in a predictable manner, and you can leverage that.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
And it makes you feel clever. I mean, you might be dominating them in the sense that you're going to defeat them through doing this, but it's the cleverness aspect that you touched on that made
tactics.
Exactly.
It's using tactics. Yeah, ultimately, most games do come down to dominating, I guess. But I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I brought up adventure games to some degree too, where you feel like you figured something out. But just, sandbox games in general. Like Minecraft's a good example, but
or
I feel like
toy box mode in Toy Story 3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or Disney Infinity, right? And Spark, which I don't think is around anymore, but was pretty neat. I actually really enjoyed. I actually taught a course a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I think now, where we used Spark and Infinity and any other number of things to teach game design through basically modding or using sort of toolkits to build stuff. And I think that's pretty great. There's also there's that game Else Heartbreak, which lets you fiddle with the programming of all the objects in the world, which I think is pretty great. That's a very kind of narrow sort of experience in that way, that it's very programming focused, but I think that's also kind of interesting because you can basically go in and modify programs, and now all things work in particular ways that you change them to, which is kind of interesting and empowering in an interesting sort of different sort of way. Mm-hmm. And it's not about domination, so it might be a good fit for this conversation as well. The Magic Circle feels that way as well, but that is not. That is more domination because you are effectively trying to beat the levels or what have you. But it does feel that way to me too. Of course, I'm giving examples that are like, and here's what it's like to feel like a programmer.
Yeah, it's very empowering for me.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, those are things I thought of. I mean, Minecraft and Infinity are more designy.
No, I'm half serious because like I think I probably could learn something from playing those games and feel closer to you and my fellow programmers or my peer programmers. Because I just often feel like I can't speak your guys' language, and I would like to do that a little bit more.
You do fine. You do fine. That was one of our strengths as a partnership, is that we could find a way across the divide and talk to each other in a reasonable way. So.
Fair enough. That's a good topic. I like it a lot. I'll be
and I'm curious to see what else comes out of Mikkel's work, because I do. I mean, I think that's one of the things that. I mean, to a certain extent, I wonder if some of the games that are on mobile, like, I mean, the big example I think of because it was so successful is Kim Kardashian's Hollywood, which is empowering, although I do feel like it plays into a very specific way of empowering. So I'm not sure how it fits into the whole thing. That maybe
I feel like maybe that is power fantasy of a different kind.
Yeah.
Because of her persona and like that. Only because my wife is begrudgingly a little bit obsessed with those crazy people, but so I know a little bit too much about them. So
Oh, good for you. I don't want to know.
No, you don't. But it's interesting.
All right. Well, it's an interesting, and that game itself was an interesting phenomenon, and I feel like I should have played a little bit about it, but or a little bit of it, but I just didn't get around to it. Anyway, I guess let's put a pin in it there. Mm-hmm. We will be back in a week with something. We're figuring that out. And so keep an eye on our Twitter account at twitter.com/devgameclub. You can also find me there at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we love to have your podcast reviews on Apple Podcasts, and you can shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. But for now, I guess I'll say good night, Kratos.
Good night.